So I'm joined here by Peter Gradilone. So Peter, thank you for joining us. And I want to ask you, where are you based and what do you do?
It's a pleasure to be with you, Juan. I am currently doing adult psychotherapy. I am based in New York City. I'm with the Clarity Therapy Association in New York City, and we have offices there. As you can imagine, a lot is now telehealth, and I do most of my practice now is telehealth with some office hours. Uh, I will see adolescents as well, and but most of my practice now is centered around the Clarity Therapy Association in New York City.
Wonderful. And before we get into other things we're going to talk about, I want to ask you if you feel comfortable answering, how has your work changed or evolved as with this pandemic that we've all been going through as of, 2-3 years ago? How have you seen it change or evolve over the years?
With COVID, it's well, I come from a very traditional analytical background of late, and there's a very strong structure to that where you come into the office, you don't do telehealth, and I was sort of a disciple of that. But because of the situation that we've had, needing to see people through a telehealth platform, I've been a convert to it to a large degree. And also, I've been able to see people well outside of the range of who'd be able to come into my office. So I work with a college student, for instance, who lives about 500 miles from here.
Wow.
So it's opened up my eyes from sort of that, shall we say, more static background of, you come into the office, you sit down, you look at your therapist. That's good. I do like to have people come in periodically because I think that is part of it. But I'm pleasantly surprised to see how much work can happen over the telehealth platform.
Totally. Yeah. You're not the first therapist to tell me, or whether someone who works in social work or therapy, you're not the first person to tell me that this has been quite a challenge, but it has afforded more people more access to folks like you. So
Yes.
thank you for that work that you do. I'm very open about being myself. I go to a therapist myself, and I'm a big proponent for taking care of your mental health and seeking that help when you need it. So thank
Mhm.
you. So I know we're both here to talk about spirituality. So I want to ask you first, what has been your life's experience with the realm of spirituality or in relationship to religion?
Oh boy, that is a very long uh, that's a very long process because it has been an evolution. It's been an evolution of being ingrained in a very formal Catholic background growing up, rejecting that completely, going on a search for a spiritual material or spiritual way of being in other practices, having a major crisis at one point of my life at about 10, 11 years ago, and then suddenly realizing I did have a lens to look at things through, and that was the Catholic lens. And I was able to go to the Jesuits and receive on a retreat, in a silent retreat, and I was able to glue myself back together enough in order to get myself going again. But that shifted things when I began to be exposed to the religious component more as a therapeutic modality. That and then I moved into was in Jungian analysis, and Jung was very friendly towards religion. Freud was not. It was more along the lines of Marx. It's the opiate of the masses. But Jung said, no. Religion is a critical thing, and he spent a great deal of his time writing about it. So I've tried to integrate that into my practice. Sometimes it's very overt. If I do have religious patients, such as some of the Catholics I see, or it's somewhat more spiritual in nature with a bit more generality to it, nothing specific, nothing dogmatic. And then, of course, there are people who don't want to approach that, and there's more of a cognitive-based approach.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's something that has come up in my therapy sessions that I don't mind sharing here with folks. When I started opening up to my therapist, who doesn't really, he himself does not isn't part of this realm of the spiritual work I do, whether as a medium or as a tarot card reader, but I started discovering all these things. And so he talked to me about Jung also, and how Jung was more tying some spiritual lingo or ways of talking about spirituality with psychology. Does that sound about right? Do I have that right?
You know, it sounds very right. And if I can offer a very critical quote from Jung, which says a lot. Of course, Jung wrote a ridiculous amount of material. It took a lifetime to get through it. But he said something interesting in his later years. He said, you know, I've never had a successful analysis with a patient unless that patient acquired some sort of religious sense. And what he meant by that, not in the tradition that you know the patient had to suddenly run off and go back to or start up with a temple, a mosque, or a church, but in terms of religio. Could you find a sense of meaning? Do you have a quest for purpose? Do you and can you orient yourself in something that's just not within the realm of, say, the first three chakras, you know, health, wealth, and progeny? Can you awaken at the level of the heart? And not everybody does want to do that. There are many people who do want to live in those lower realms, and that's fine. I'm not criticizing that. But then there are people who say, you know what, there's something more to life than this, or at least there's something, I want to find out if there's something more to my life.
Right.
And so the religious orientation, although that's a word that sets people off like God, but what he meant was the religio.
Got it. Okay. And on this podcast, as you probably know, I talk a lot about, I call it spirit with a capital S, but I also call it the supernatural, the paranormal. So for you, what was your relationship? Because you said, I also grew up with a Catholic background. So for me as a Catholic, I mean, I feel like Roman Catholicism has I'm gonna call it a dabble in the supernatural. It's a very mystical religion with a lot of tight boundaries and limits, and rules and dogma. But so that being said, with your religious background, your upbringing, what was your relationship or understanding of the words like supernatural, the paranormal, things like that?
Well, I tell you, in my more rationalistic phase of life and practice, it was kind of just struck me as sort of, well, that's a little airy fairy. It's it fell into something to be more easily dismissed. Not completely so, but our sense of reality is not necessarily the way that things are. I was thinking today, maybe this is a very rough example, but I'm looking at my beautiful husky. I have a great dog. And I said, you know something? She can out-hear me, out-see me, and out-smell. Now, her natural world, the way that she receives it through her senses, is superior to mine in that realm. So just because you cannot see something within your five senses as a human being does not mean that it does not exist. That would be dogmatic too, and there's such a thing as scientific dogmatism. When, because it's a little ridiculous in some ways. I used to teach science for many years, so I don't want to dismiss science. But it's getting locked into something where you really don't have a complete answer to it. And if you don't have a complete answer to anything, that you're best served by just opening up to possibilities. Because and the mystics say, as soon as you find God, go past that. Because that's a God of your limitation. That's your ego construct kicking in and saying God is this, God is that. And as the late theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, he wanted to ban the word God for a century. Ban the word for a century because people get into all kinds of trouble with that word. So I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but this is the road I'm going down.
No, I love that. And it's the reason that I started this podcast. And when I talk to folks like yourself on this podcast, or I'm thinking about who's listening on the other end of a headphone or an iPhone, whatever device, a computer, I always like to make people feel like they can step into the space of talking about these things without any judgment. It's less about proving something or trying to determine what kind of experience, like if I'm talking to you about an experience you had, which we will in a second, it's not about us determining right here and now what exactly that was you experienced. It's just about you sharing about it, because there's more people in the world than we think that experience things that they can't really explain. And that's okay. It's okay to not be able to explain something, but it's also, I feel like it's so beneficial to everyone that we do share about them, and so the others don't feel quite alone. I've realized before that sometimes I've shared something that happened to me personally on a spiritual level that I thought it was a unique experience just for me, an odd and unique experience, and I share it with somebody, and they had something similar happen to them, and that's what this podcast is for. So I think what you were saying about not being okay, not having an explanation for something, and instead taking the route of being like opening ourselves up to possibilities. I think that's a wonderful way, just a wonderful way to live in general, no matter whether you're spiritual or not.
Oh,
Yeah.
otherwise you dry up like a prune because
Yeah.
people become rigid in their thought processes, and part of that is security. They don't want to know anything up to the point that they already know something now. But we do age; our bodies do fall off. I'm now well into my 60s, and though my body is still relatively serving me well, I can still grow spiritually, and you can still grow spiritually until the very last breath you take, if you want to. Something I just a bit of a tangent, because something you were talking about tarot or astrology, and what might be helpful, and I understand this from a Jungian background, is that see, all of those things are not to be necessarily rigidly accepted or dismissed. They can be, but they exist within psyche. Tarot exists within psyche. The astrological charts and the idea of astrology exists within psyche. Therefore, why is that? Or at least we can ask that question. What prompts psyche to kick that stuff up, so to speak? So it's all there, including imagination. You could say a unicorn is not real. Well, again, sensory-based evidence. I suppose you won't see a unicorn, but yet the idea exists within psyche. So it must mean something, particularly if it comes up in dreams or other ways as symbolic. It points to something.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And if I'm following along with what you're saying correctly, what that brings up for me, something I always tell people is that when I'm reading cards, the power is not in the cards. The cards are a symbol, as everything in life is. Everything in life that's physical that we associate with is something that we've attributed a symbol to. And
Mhm.
I also tell people, whether it's cards or people read something called runes, which I'm not very familiar with, but I've heard about it. Some people read tea leaves. Some people are just, I also practice mediumship, where it's just me, my body, and a notebook and a
Mhm.
pen. No matter what the literal medium or the channel or the outlet is, it's like I compare it to eating forks versus eating with forks versus eating with chopsticks. Some people eat with
Uh-huh.
chopsticks, some people eat with forks. At the end of the day, it's all eating. It's just different ways of eating. And so I
Yep.
always tell folks, the power is not in the cards. The cards don't work unless I'm using my intuition with them. And I can sort of relate to what you're saying about it all being in the psyche, because again, these are all symbols. Cards were drawn by human beings. They have symbols in them. They are symbolic of human intuition and how people want to use their intuition to read them.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that just says much more how powerful our minds are, and in my opinion, how powerful the universal energy or source is, that we can get. In my opinion, we can get this information from the universe through using things that we associate within the physical, which is it's a kind of an oxymoron. We're going beyond our bodies and also using things that are in the physical world to
Yeah.
access that.
It's a meld of all of these things that makes it holistic. It's all integrated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I know you've had an extraordinary spiritual experience yourself. So I would love to hear more about that. What is it that you experienced?
Well, I'm taking a bit of a breath here. It was 30 years ago this past September. What happened was, I was a great fan of, I still am a fan of M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled. And he was giving a 5-day community building workshop in Omega in Rhinebeck. So I thought, I have to go. I have to go. I guess I was 37 at the time. Yes, 37. So I went, and it was 5 days of some of the most intensive work that I have ever done. It was an immersion in absolutely listening to other human beings who were in this group. It was a relatively large group. Um, I was filled with certain judgments at the beginning, and we went through what were called the stages of community, the pseudo community, which a lot of community is, and pseudo meaning, people are nice to each other. Let's have community. Let's keep it positive. We don't want anything negative here. So Peck called that pseudo community. So he went through that stage until somebody stood up and said, "This is this is fucking crazy." You know, we don't love each other. We don't know each other. So we took our seats again, and then that was the opening of the beginning of what was just being more real and more honest with each other. Like, you know what you just said just pissed me off. The problem with what I'm doing right now, explaining it to you now, Juan, is that I'm using language, and language is completely inferior to the experience.
Mm.
So I'm struggling for words that might convey the process of what happened. But at some point, when things reached a pitch level of anger and insanity, we managed to fall into what was the next. We didn't really know the stages, but whoever was facilitating, there were two people facilitating the meeting, and they knew what was happening. And we kept saying, what do we do? What do we do? What's happening? And they would, you're on the right track. Yeah, this seems to be, you could be on the right track. So after the level of the pseudo community and the level of chaos, I think that's the formal name for the stage, came this place of emptiness where we just didn't have the energy to scream at each other anymore. And then by, I would say, the fourth day, we entered into that last stage, which was emptiness, which was a place of extraordinary and complete capacity to listen to other people. I've never experienced anything like it. I'm not at all prone to headaches, but I had a headache just from the intensity of listening for at least 2 days straight during this process. That's how intense the requirement was to listen to other human beings, to find yourself drifting off, your thoughts drifting off to something while someone is speaking, and then really wrestling your conscious back into the moment where you were focused on this person. It was very necessary to do that. And by the end of the fifth day, we were a genuinely communal group. And the last assignment was to come up with some sort of presentation or project based upon acting as a community, a genuine community. And sometimes that does mean selecting someone who is going to be in charge of things, particularly if they have the talent to do so. So anyway, we managed to do this. And at the very end of it all, when we were gathered together, we were kind of stuck at some place. And I remember getting up and saying, all I know is that I do not know. And I think that was somewhat important in terms of breaking the ice for everybody. I'm not trying to aggrandize myself. It just happened to work out that way. And then there was this tremendous feeling of totality that began at that moment and lasted for at least a couple of days. It was so overwhelming. So it's like, someone's trying to get your attention, and they might say your name, hi Juan or something, hey Peter, tap you on the shoulder. I've never experienced where whatever it was, which I could not define, was trying to get my complete attention in totality. Like every cell of my body was asked to be aware of its presence. I don't know how to describe it. I've never experienced it before that, and I've never experienced it in the 30 years since that happened. But I do know, it's not a belief, I do know that this sense of spirit that descended upon us, upon me in particular, I was feeling it. Other people were as well, but they were having their own experience. So this powerful experience gave me knowing that something, it was similar, I guess, if I had to translate it into, my more familiar Christian ways, it's when I think Jesus said, wherever two or more of you are gathered in my name, I am there. So it was, something was there,
Hmm.
but it was an all encompassing, powerful something. And uh, it was hard to come back to the quote unquote regular world. I didn't quite return for at least 2 weeks. I went to my job. I just was not the same for a couple of weeks. I said the third week I started to regain more quote unquote normalcy. I use that word carefully, but it was profound, absolutely profound.
When you had that phase of re-entry from that experience back, going back to work and doing the daily things that you
Mhm.
usually do, what were the thoughts going through your head? Because I can think of questions that would go through my head after an experience like that, and having that re-entry back into regular daily living after that. But I want to hear from you. What was going on through your head?
It was very it was a very observing experience, because I would walk by people having conversations, and sometimes the conversations were negative or they were kind of trite, at least the way I was perceiving it. And I just was having a hard time, instead of like saying, well, there's so and so criticizing so and so again. But again, I don't have words for it. I just wasn't receiving it the same way. It's like, it was almost like, guys, there's something else that's huge here in our lives, if it can be accessed. And you're judging somebody else really does not mean anything in this realm of possibility under this kind of level of spirit. I felt alone, because there was simply nobody that I could talk to about. You are right now in this podcast, this is the most I've talked about it in 30 years, other than to my own Jungian analyst. I've mentioned it to my partner. She knows of it, but I haven't gone in depth. It's been a very private experience. And I think because you have to feel safe, I think, if you share this. So,
Of course.
and your orientation for your podcast seems to be, well, okay, if I'm going to talk about it, I might as well talk about it here and see what happens.
Well, I know I speak for others listening to this in saying thank you for trusting me, trusting this platform to share this story with, because I mean, I'm listening to the story, and for those listening, Peter had told me about the story prior to us recording this episode, but not in this much detail and in this moment to moment description. And I'm getting goosebumps, Peter, hearing your story. And I mean, I know it sounds maybe a little bit, I don't know if it sounds cheesy or corny, but I feel a sense of just like such awareness on my end as I hear you tell your story, just an awareness of something beyond. And I mean, this is something I believe in regularly. I think about it regularly, and it's part of my life, but I just feel I feel very different right now, and it feels great. And it's a result of hearing your story. And I know that there's at least one other person out there that feels similarly, or like they just heard something really important from you. What would you say has been the impact of that experience? I mean, we heard about the impact during that re-entry phase, coming back from that retreat at Omega. How has this experience or the memory of it impacted you in the longer term up to today, or even just thinking back on it now? How does it have that impact on you today?
That's a great question. And um, I'm reminded what Scott Peck said. He said, regardless of what has gone on in life, in the world, and in the whatever tragedies he was facing, he said, because of that experience that he had on the spiritual level, he could never quite lose complete hope for the world. And what it taught me was, I've seen some people over the years professionally that, shall we say, well, maybe they you wouldn't have given a plum nickel for them to succeed in therapy. They were very damaged individuals. But because of this experience, I can't judge. Going back to saying at that gathering, all I know is that I don't know. I don't know if I can help this person. I don't know if they can break the bonds of what is keeping them ill. But I have absolutely no right to make my own personal ego-based judgment. I will work with someone to the limit of my capacities. And then, quite frankly, I do turn it over sometimes to the numinous, to the divine. There are times in therapy when I might just look up and say, well, let me say something that's not stupid here. let me say something that's going to help this person cross this bridge here, as opposed to just sitting here in complete ignorance. So that numinous or divine quality, it does come in to my work. It's more felt. It's not belief. It almost is never belief. It's pretty much experience. And of course, it's self-reinforcing, because if you're working with somebody and then they do cross that bridge, it's just reinforcing. Well, okay, yeah, we can call upon things other than just ego-based therapy.
And did I get this right, that when you had this experience at the age of 37, you were a practicing therapist?
I was teaching at that time.
Okay.
No, I was teaching. That's when I was teaching science. I was teaching science in New York City at that time, science and math. But I was a big reader. I was, the Catholic background I came from was quite rigid, and I found it very unsatisfactory. So I started to self-educate myself. I had lived in the woods, like a bit like Thoreau, for about 7 years. So I managed to read copiously and I tried to solve my Catholic upbringing, shall we say.
I completely understand that. I've had a very similar experience. And actually, listeners won't know this, but maybe you see my camera, Peter, that I was looking to my left a couple times at my bookshelf that you don't see, because I actually have The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck on my bookshelf, but I have yet to read it. It's actually, Peter, funny enough, it is directly to the left of me, like head level. So it's like, it's looking at me. It sounds like this book had a big impact on you. Folks like myself have it on our book list to read. So would you mind sharing what impact this book in particular had on you?
Juan, this is so interesting. I know you can't do it on the podcast, but no, I just have two copies here of The Road Less Traveled.
Yep, here's mine. I'm holding mine up. Listeners can't see it, but I got mine right here.
I was asked to do, for my association, we meet, the psychotherapist, we meet once a week. So I was asked to do, pick a topic, and I say, how does religion and spirituality enter your field of psychotherapy? What do you do with it? Now, unfortunately, a lot of, I learned this early at Fordham University, a lot of therapists fail to take inventory on people's spiritual and religious orientation. But anyway, long story short, one of the therapists asked, what's the best book that I could read, or what's a book that I could read? And I said, and I don't mean to be arrogant, but I have a library of well over 500 books here. But I said, if I had to go to a desert island and someone said, you can only take one book about psychology and spirituality with you, what would you bring? The answer is The Road Less Traveled, because it begins with something that a lot of other material does not. It begins with the statement, life is difficult. Sometimes we get engaged in toxic positivity, and people are not feeling very positive. They want to know that they can be embraced, even though they feel like they're absolutely at the bottom of it all. So just by starting with that statement, life is difficult, as the Buddha taught, life is suffering. It's an acknowledgement of the reality that life sometimes just is really at the bottom, and it's very negative. And to accept that in some way transcends the need to always have it positive. I can accept that it can be negative.
Thank you for that. And I was just thinking, what an affirming thing to read a book like The Road Less Traveled and the first words be life is difficult. And you just said what I was thinking as well, that the things that have been in the past, I don't know, I feel like in the past 10, 15 years, this idea of just be positive has been part of the more mainstream culture of at least this country. And now we recognize it as toxic positivity and things like, don't be sad, don't be angry. But the fact of the matter is, sadness, anger, jealousy, rage, these are all parts of being human. And why not just, and maybe I don't know if embrace them is the right word, but accept that these are things we feel, and then work with them to see how we should interact with those emotions, those reactions or responses in a way that will help us grow and evolve as people.
The first, the very first step that has to be taken is the complete acknowledgement of the truth that you're not okay. I am not okay.
Yes.
And then from that, rather than trying to keep it at bay, but you know what, hey, I am not okay. I am miserable. I am depressed. That's the beginning of then at least getting a foothold, because you're not denying it and you're not trying to sugarcoat it anymore.
Right. And I'm going to go a little bit off script with this question, because this makes me, what we're talking about right now makes me think of something else. So with this experience you had at the age of 37 at Omega, and between that, the content you've read and how you've take a Jungian approach to your work, I'll preface my question with this additional piece. So I feel like in this culture, US culture, capitalistic culture, which I'm a part of, I'm a working person full time, it's okay to, if this is a yes and kind of situation, where we can criticize this culture and also be part of it and take part in it. I do feel like I've had the frequent experience of, just be happy at work. Like, you can't show any signs of having a bad day, or maybe if you're feeling sad because something happened to you, like someone broke up with you or you got dumped, you had a bad date. I don't know why I'm focusing on romance, but let's just use that as an example. Show up to work and be okay. Has your own work with people influenced how you interact with people in regards to these situations where, like, it's okay for people to not be okay around you or around us? If that makes any sense. Like, I feel like it's so easy to just get sucked into this culture where everyone has to feel okay all the time in order to impress people or to meet the status quo. So I guess I'll rephrase my question or reword it and say, how have your experiences, both professionally, personally, and spiritually, affected your perception of this cultural okayness that we struggle with?
Oh, it's god awful. Because it's like staring in a mirror with a lot of aphorisms that, like, well, I'm a great and wonderful person. I really am just worthwhile. And then I've had patients or clients say, but I feel like an effing liar. I'm staring in the mirror with these aphorisms, and I'm lying to myself. So now I feel even worse. So to me, it's just feel as you are. Sometimes the patients will apologize. Oh, I'm doing this, or I'm sorry, I'm this way, and I do not do that. There's no need to. The whole idea is that you have to have a safe place, hopefully in therapy, where you can be your miserable self if you need to be. You can be your joyous self if that's the case. But you have to have a place of acceptance. And most of us in the world, let's face it, in our society, we don't have deep, deep places of acceptance. I mean, I can belong to a certain club and I'll be accepted as a club. And as long as the material stays on club level, it's fine. And that really can be very happy. But when we really look at our own lives, sometimes we're very alone with a safe place to be just really who we are and how we're feeling, and be accepted for that, not rejected or expected to be anything else. So I really try to orient my clients to be that way. Be as you are.
It's absolutely wonderful. And I'm just thinking it's quite sad that we are a culture where we've taught each other that, I'm not talking to you, Peter, but just a generic rhetorical you, like, your struggles are an inconvenience to me. Don't share about your struggles because that puts a burden on me. And of course, this isn't to say I'm going to go to work tomorrow and tell everyone all my baggage from today. Like, there's a, time and place, and trust is such a big thing. Also, you have to trust who you're sharing with. But I am noticing and that there is a shift in, is it called workplace workplace psychology, or I forget, the psychology of the workplace, whatever
Yeah.
that subfield is called,
Right.
of like taking an approach of, letting people have the space to express themselves, and if they're not feeling okay, being more lenient with like sick days or mental health days and things like that.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping that continues to be the trend.
Of course, everything can be abused as well. And there are individuals who, if they're narcissistically inclined, will then just use every space to talk about themselves and their problems. So there's no such thing as it being pure. You have to have a sense of intuition for when this is a deep conversation, this is deeply felt, this is deeply needed, and when someone is basically using up airspace just because they like to talk about themselves.
Right. We've met those before.
Yeah.
We've seen them run for positions, in our country. So yeah,
Oh,
we've seen that. But I won't go any
no.
further with that. But
No, yes, there's plenty to talk about in that level.
well, I expected to have a wonderful conversation with you in this episode, and I certainly did, and more. This conversation just honestly blew my mind. So I just want to thank you for sharing your story, which I know has been very personal up to this point, and sharing it with me and our listeners. And I want to give you the floor here and ask you, how can our listeners find out more about you or what you do?
Well, the easiest thing to do is to go to the Clarity website. So it's Clarity Therapy NYC, and claritytherapynyc.com. You can Google it, it'll come right up, or you can put in the address. And the therapists are there, and you can scroll through people, therapists like myself. If you want to focus on me, you can just click on my image and it'll have at least three blog pieces that I've written. One is specifically religion and spirituality and psychotherapy, and some other things and other citations that have been published over the years. So yeah, I invite people to go to Clarity Therapy NYC, and feel free to, if you feel like you're in need of therapy, or there are many therapists there from varied backgrounds, and including myself, if anybody would like any clarity of that. My email there is peter@claritytherapynyc.com. So I don't know if I'm going to be inundated with any questions, but if any.
I hope you are, but I also hope you're not, because I hope people are feeling, well, I hope people feel comfortable reaching out to you, but I also hope that, it's a good problem to have, but I don't know what that means, but
I know, I kind of take things now as a celestial assignment. If I have to answer some emails,
oh, I love that.
Not 1,000, but
no, I love that thinking, a celestial assignment. I'm going to start using that phrase. That's absolutely wonderful.
It is, quite frankly, just saying yes to this and revealing this long-held, experience of mine. Well, maybe this is my celestial assignment. I have to talk to Juan about this.
When I want to clarify to those listening, I'm not saying it is unfortunate if you reach out to Peter and his team. I'm just saying, I hope that that people have the resources they need, and
yes.
they have access to them as it is. But if you do need an extra resource or need a new resource, to reach out to Peter and his team. And Peter, do you work with only folks in the New York City or tri-state area, or do you work with folks across the country? I did hear you say you work with someone 500 miles away, so I wanted to make sure listeners know about
that person is in New York now. They've relaxed regulations, interstate regulations, to an extent because of COVID. So I have seen people outside of the New York area. That I take as a one at a time consideration, because they probably will reinstate the rules and regulations to tighten that up, because the only way people have been able to see a therapist is through telehealth.
Right.
So, but that's, as you can imagine, that's expanded well. Or if I have a New Yorker who's now in California, but they still had a residence in New York, so I can see somebody in California, perhaps.
Right. Well, if anything, if restrictions tighten again in terms of jurisdictions and who you can talk to, hopefully this just inspires somebody to seek the help that they need, whether it be you, your team, or somebody else in their area.
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for our conversation today. I'm so honored to have spoken with you about this topic and your story. Thank you.
And thank you, Juan. It's been really a pleasure to spend time with you. Appreciate it.
If you have a question or topic you want me to cover on Third Eyesight, head to my website, juanfranciscospirit.com/contact, and send a message my way. If you really enjoyed this episode, leave a review wherever you listen. I'd really appreciate it.